and thanks all for heading out on such a wonderful evening. I can't believe it. I still feel like it was about sort of 3 weeks ago that it was still light at 10 o'clock. Now, if the dogs are out at 7:30, you're caught in this.
Change your watch. Change your watch, it'll be okay.
Okay. Rewriting the rules. Okay, first item is minutes from the previous meeting. I hope everybody has reviewed those and they're okay for me to sign. Any objections? No. Okay, apologies for absence. We have a few apologies and a number of substitutions. Councillor Elliott has sent his apologies, as has Councillor Guest, Councillor Reynolds, Councillor Capozzi. We welcome as substitutes Councillor Duras, Councillor Anderson and Councillor Link. I have no intentions of running out of the meeting, but obviously, if for any reason I can't chair the meeting, Councillor Williams would be the likely vice chair to take over from me.
Are you feeling all right, Jeff?
I'm feeling fine. I'm just hoping nobody's going to try chasing me out of the meeting. But I just thought I'd acknowledge that obviously we hopefully we don't need a vice chair, but it is an important position. Okay, declarations of interest. Do we have any? No? Okay. Item 4 is public participation. There is none. Items 5 is consideration of any matter referred to the committee to call in. There are none. However, I'm going to use this item just to quickly address the matter of tenancy insurance that was emailed to all members as a portfolio holder decision, with some very thorough explanation from both Claire and Nigel on that. So just want to make sure that we as a committee are acknowledging that and noting the decision. Agreed. Okay. Item 6 is action points from the previous meeting. Again, there are none. And then we move on to item 7, which is the work programme. And we do have some additional items onto that if people would hopefully looked at. And also been looking forward to the other items we have coming forward. Does anybody have any feedback or concerns with those? I won't say changes, but they're just formally giving dates on things that we asked for to come onto the work programme. So, Councillor Allen.
We've currently got parish grants out to consultation. It'd be a good idea to come to the committee on the 5th of November.
5th of November, okay. I would assume that will be subject to the officers having the correct report on that, but I'm quite happy that we can acknowledge that will come on the 5th of November. Any further comments? No? Okay, so we'll proceed on to our first real agenda item, which is item 8, which is the financial monitoring report, quarter 1. And Catherine is joining us remotely, so I'm...
So let me just jump in there. Apologies, I did say I would tell the committee. Catherine pretty much has no voice at the moment, which is why she is logged in remotely and is here. She will message me if she's got any points to put through, but literally I can tell you after the last few days, there's pretty much nothing there. So she's here just to listen in and make sure she's not missing the evening. And she, as I said, she can chat to me if she wants me to put any points across from herself. So I will take this agenda item in terms of introducing it to start off with. I am going to take the report as read. It is in the standard format for our financial report, but it is obviously the first quarter report for 25-26. Just to point to 3 key aspects of the report. In terms of our general fund financial position, we are projecting a surplus of £550,000 as of the end of Q1. There are three key aspects that bring that around. Financial pressures from environmental services, where we've had increased agency and increased absenteeism in terms of the workforce, as well as requiring additional staff than what was expected to deliver the service, creating a pressure. That is not new. That has been ongoing from the previous financial year. It is significantly lower, but it isn't where we want it to be. So that is something we're looking at in terms of how we plan for that for the rest of this year. And we may come back at Q2 to Scrutiny and Cabinet with some proposals to balance some of those budgets to resolve that ongoing financial pressure. The other area of significant pressure is investment property, which is a combination of some short-term pressures related to the new facilities management contract with some implementation costs and some ongoing pressures in that service area, particularly around utilities, we're struggling to manage. So again, we might take a similar approach at Q2 and come back and look to balance that budget in year and set a strategy for going forward into 26-27. They are both subsumed by Treasury Management, again, a third item that is not new to this committee and is something that is exceeding our budgeted expectations, partly because of item 3 I will come to, which is capital slippage, which means we're spending significantly less, projecting to spend significantly less. And also, as we're probably all aware, interest rates at the moment are much higher than what we previously forecast. So at this moment in time, interest rates are almost 0.75% higher than what our forecast was in December when we were setting the budget. So from that perspective, we're getting a much greater return, almost 20% greater than what we expected at the budget setting time. Now, that's great whilst we've got cash balances at the moment. The cash balances are 20 million down year on year over the last 12 months. We expect them at the end of this year with our current capital programme to be down again. So although there is a windfall, it is only a short-term one, although we do at this moment in time project, and I think it's in the report, that there probably will be a slight surplus in 26-7, which we will put into the budget setting proposals later on in the year. That's in terms of revenue side. Moving on to the HRA. The HRA is reporting a surplus, a pressure, of £460,000. Two key aspects, again, things that are constantly threatening the HRA for us and the sector-wide, and that is around damp and mould, but also around disrepair cases. We've got a lot of work that we need to do and a lot of cases that we need to make sure that we're up to in terms of current legislation, and that's creating some financial pressures. But the service are managing those as effectively as can do. As this group will probably remember, the HRA delivered a surplus in 24/5 for the first time in 4 years. So from that perspective, it is back under pressure, which we don't want to see, but we are looking to mitigate and manage that before year end. And I expect the service to be able to do that within their current programme of work. And then the third area I just want to bring to the attention is around capital. We have slippage in both the general fund and the HRA. The general fund is around leisure. As this group will know, Cabinet approved a few months ago the leisure programme going forward, and that slips most of that spend into 26-27, 7-8, whilst we're planning for the works that we'll do up to the £23 million that's presently committed to those programmes. So it's just a case of the fact that the timing of that has slightly changed in the general fund. And with the HRA, the conclusion of the Paradise Depot project that was expected to conclude in 25-26 will now slip into 26-27. This is prior to any very recent incidents that have occurred, but we still expect it to be completed next year. So there is a slippage. The project will still get completed just slightly, in a slightly different financial year. That's all I wanted to bring to the committee's attention. Take any questions.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you, Catherine, for joining. We hope you recover quickly. I'll just kick off with one out there question. Don't worry, it's not one of my usuals. I'll direct this to Nigel, but it might have to loop back to William. There were some figures, I don't know how official, that we were looking at in the last couple of months alongside the MTFS and what our total sort of savings / income targets for the next few years to be to balance the budget. Am I correct that those numbers and the surplus that we're now saying against the 25-26 budget are independent of each other? So therefore, the if the surpluses remain as we're looking at the moment, that will actually reduce some of our targets.
So if we have an ongoing surplus, so we have budget lines that are going to be ongoing into 26-27, we will absolutely use them to help balance the budget for 26-27. We are, as of the MTFS that reported in July, we are not a million miles off balancing 26-27. Although a small element of the Treasury might be ongoing and might be able to slip into 26-27, as we've alluded to, we do still have a couple of pressures that we need to resolve as part of that budget setting for 26-27, particularly environmental services and some of the property costs that we're seeing, particularly the ones that are linked to utilities, because that is now across the organisation as well as in commercial property. So there will be some areas of growth, there will be some areas of surplus, as always in the budget setting cycle. And we'll go through the budget setting cycle and the process in the next agenda item. We'll take those into consideration. The first thing we do before we discuss any potential savings or efficiencies with the administration is try and see how we can best balance the budget without having to make any extreme decisions.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to the floor. So we'll come to Councillor Pound first. No. Oh, okay, sorry. Right, go. No, okay, so we'll have a drink. I saw that. Okay, Councillor Deacon.
Just a quick question. What do you mean by properties linked to utilities? What does that mean?
Well, it's the utility costs in the properties that's driving part of that deficit. We're spending a lot more on some of the utilities and also in maintaining them, mainly because the costs are increasing.
Yeah. Example of that?
So in terms of maintenance, most of our maintenance costs are increasing by about 7 or 8%, in line with a lot of construction costs that are coming out.
Okay.
So that's increasing. Utilities is increasing above the 5% we put in the budget. We do procure most of our utilities on a futures basis, but there is a small element based on usage that we don't, and that's the element that's increasing significantly. Just like your household utility bills, water, gas and electric,
yeah.
You're probably seeing them increase above inflation at the moment.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Santa Maria.
I'll just ask and then, never mind. Why is filming experiencing pressure? Is that because it's costing money, or is it just because there's less income from filming?
It's not
than we were
achieving budgeted
expecting?
income.
Right, okay, so that's,
We had a big surge in filming income around about 22-23, which was probably linked to COVID and the fact that several organisations weren't able to travel to film, so more filming was done in the UK, and we had some great opportunities there in terms of making money, particularly from car parking. So people remember the Old Town Hall being used for various different projects over that period. At that point in time, we tried to grow that. We implemented a permanent full-time filming officer and looked to expand on some of those opportunities. Those opportunities have been harder to find, probably a combination of post-COVID and also the fact that the wider economy is shrinking to a certain extent, so that's made it a lot harder. We're also in the heartland of the film industry in Hertfordshire, so there's a lot of competition, and hence the filming service isn't achieving the income levels that we would expect it to do so.
Licensing. I thought the idea with the rates that we set for licensing was that we are restricted to just enough to cover costs. So why is that not happening at the moment?
So licensing, you're right, in terms of a lot of the fees are fixed by either the costs or by a certain government amount. Where it's a certain government amount, we're fixed on what income we can achieve and expenditure goes up. But some of it is based on demand. How much demand are we getting and how much are we being able to process? And that's where those pressures come about.
Okay, and then my last question is, in terms of the car park, the electric charging points, it said we're not meeting the demand that we'd expected. How far off are we? Is it a little bit, or is it enough where we might want to pause the rollout because it's not achieving what we want it to?
So in terms of how far off, we're quite a way off. I think it's just over £50,000 in terms of income. That's due to two things. One, the implementation has taken far longer than we expected. A couple of the sites had some significant issues with UKPN, which meant instead of them starting 12 months ago and building up a business, they're starting right at the start of the year with no business. So it's quite hard at the moment to understand if demand is below what we projected because of the timing or below because there is less demand out there. What the service are saying is predominantly now new car sales are electric. The demand is increasing throughout the whole of the UK. So from that perspective, once these sites are up and running and marketed and well known, there is an expectation that it will grow. The uncertainty at the moment is whether it will achieve the levels that we previously expected, because there's also been a growth in the supply sector.
Thank you.
I'll nudge that. I know there's a few charging points in Berkhamsted that haven't got up and going yet, and I've now used one of the car sharing apps that my charger is now used by 2 other households in my neighbourhood. So I'm getting like sort of £4 or £5 a week from them charging from me. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Yeah. On that one, I'm not entirely surprised. It wasn't my question, but not entirely surprised we're not achieving the income from electric vehicle charging. I always thought that companies were very optimistic on the level of demand, but since we weren't paying for the installation, I was happy to agree for them to install them as they saw fit. But I thought the level of demand they were expecting, very few people, I suspect, buy an electric vehicle unless they can charge it at home. I mean, it's to be dependent on public chargers would make it a very expensive option. So that's not surprising. My real question is, obviously the budget here looks quite good, so £500,000 under, but that's being very heavily disguised by 1.8 million of additional income. So effectively, the budget is 1.3 million pounds overspent at this point, or projected to be overspent on a range of either underachievement of income or expenditure exceeding budget. So what are the plans to bring that 1.3 million back in online?
So there's 2 aspects. The reason I alluded to early on in terms of the Q2 report, potentially looking at some budget environments, is just looking at some of our budget areas and looking at how we can balance that more in year to bring more achievable budget baselines. So that work will come back as part of the Q2 report in terms of the analysis of what we're doing in those areas. There are some mitigation plans being developed, particularly around fleet, environmental services and commercial property, which again will be reported if any budget changes at that point in time are requested. And in terms of the medium term, in terms of next year's budget, we need to get these key pressures areas, be it income generation or expenditure, with a baseline budget that is far more achievable than what's being achieved at the moment. It's not really acceptable to have the overspends that we've got in certain service areas, and that's why we're looking to manage that and set a better baseline budget for this year and for next year. There are areas where we know these costs are not going to be ongoing. So some of the areas, particularly around commercial property, we know are not going to be ongoing into future years. So from that perspective, that's quite easy to mitigate. Some of the environmental services costs, particularly around fleet, are considered only short term as well, whilst we're rolling out the additional new stock. So some of it will naturally be short term and be dealt with through sustainability. Some of it we will have to make mitigation plans and change how the service delivers what they're delivering to deliver efficiencies in line with the current budget.
Thank you. Councillor Duras.
Thank you. In paragraph 4.5, you make reference to the cash balances are significantly higher than forecast and running at about £20 million. Have you factored in the interest that would accrue from because presumably if it's cash balances, it's cash in the bank, so it's there and attracting interest because of the delay and the slippage. Have you factored that in to the interest value that you were talking about earlier on?
Yes, so the reason our treasury is, over £1.5 million over our budget is because we have got more cash balances. It's something like £84 million our cash balances at the start of the financial year. Now, I say that because that was as of the 1st of April. That number, surprisingly enough, it's quite hard sometimes members to realise, can actually go up by 10 or 20 million inside a week because we have large payments we make to county in relation to business rates and council tax, and we have large incomings coming in for monthly business rates, quarterly business rates or quarterly commercial rents. So that figure does move around a hell of a lot. But at the end of the financial year or start of this financial year, it's about £84 million. And that's what we're investing. And I think the Treasury Management Report, which is published today for the Audit Committee next week, showed that last year we were getting an average, I think it's 4.93. I might be somewhere, it's 4.9 something % last year, which was up on the previous year when interest rates were higher, which shows you that we're getting a good rate of return on our investment. But as our cash balances are going to go down, that's going to impact. But equally, if we want to borrow to invest going forward, it will cost us more. So it is a double-edged sword. At the moment, we're in the benefit side of it because we're cash rich. If there comes a point in the next few years where we're cash light and we need to borrow, we'll be impacted by higher borrowing costs.
But would I be right in thinking that, if you like, if there hadn't have been slippage, if it had been delivered with no blame to anybody else on the original programme, those cash balances that £20 million wouldn't have been there, and therefore we would have been less well off in terms of the interest that had accrued.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you look at the slippage section in terms of capital, between leisure and Paradise, it's 20 million, and which we didn't think we would have to invest. So if that would have been less, the interest returns would have been less. And again, the point that Councillor Williams has raised, if we weren't getting the surplus from Treasury Management, we'd have underlying pressures there that we'd have to be resolving, far more drastic measures than we are taking at the moment.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do I have any further questions? Councillor Grenfell.
On paragraph 5.2, we talk about waste services has a higher agency cost due to high sickness and vacation. Is that high versus other areas, or is the area under-resourced?
So in terms of the environmental services area, it is our key frontline service. So it is not the only one, the main service where if somebody doesn't turn up for work, we need to put an agency member in there. So in terms of a waste vehicle, they need a certain number of operatives to be able to work. So we have to replace them with agency. Whereas a lot of people in the forum, if they are sick, we can cover without having to get agency staff in. So naturally, the frontline services will always have greater agency use than back office services. So from that perspective, yes, they will have a higher use of agency because they have to. In terms of the costs, we have preferred supplier agreements with agencies, which we manage and monitor on an annual basis, so we make sure that we are getting good value for money. They are using more for two areas. One has been slightly more absenteeism or sickness in terms of the service. It is down. It is down now on what it was a year ago, so there is some improvement happening in that side of it. But also there's been increased demand from the service, and they've been doing some additional tidy up rounds, which have again increased the cost. But that was something in terms of the service delivery, the service felt had to be done to make sure we're achieving a high standard. That's one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of mitigation of costs going forward.
And my second question, which might just be for my understanding, the 18.69 million slippage is nearly 20%. In a corporate world, that would be way beyond forecast tolerance. Is that normal, or is it just a one-off because of the leisure services?
In a local authority context, 20% slippage isn't acceptable either. We would be looking for a 90% spend. Across the housing portfolio last year, we achieved that for the first time in several years because of various historical issues that have come about. The reason in this regard, because it is one project, it's not systemic across all the capital programme. It's one programme of works that has been delayed until the next year because it changed in terms of the size, scope and scale. So from that perspective, it doesn't give me a huge amount of concern. It is frustrating. Strangely enough, the accountant in me wants to show all these variances as zero because it shows that budget setting is perfect. You'll never get a perfect world. There are some parameters like that one which is further out than I'm comfortable with.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll just make a quick cynical comment before I resume questions. I just want to sort of point out that whilst when we have slippage, especially in a capital programme, it means more money in the bank and we're getting some good returns, so they look great. The amount of money that we're being paid in interest is still nowhere near the level of inflation. So the problem is when these things slip, the costs of those things in the future are likely to go up greatly by a lot higher than our current interest income is helping. So, it's very short term to think of these things as being good, but, when we are looking at just this year's numbers, there are a positive variance. Right, so I think Councillor Williams was first.
That's a question that arises from the answer to Councillor Greenfield about waste overspend. We're only about 12 months away from, Nigel might not have the answer to this, so I might have to get it in writing, for the portfolio holder of environmental services heralding the revoking of the rounds to make them more efficient. If we're having to put extra vehicles on, we assume that hasn't worked.
No, in terms of, it's not necessarily extra vehicles or extra rounds. They have done several tidy up rounds along the way to make sure that things that potentially were missed or things that weren't running as efficiently as they have were tidied up. Now, processes have changed. That's not happening now at the moment. The service have improved in terms of how they're delivering that. There has been a certain amount of flux in terms of management of that area as well, which has caused a little bit of uncertainty in terms of the direction. But the services, in terms of the number of routes that are taking place, is still less than it was. It's still the route optimisation plan that was put in place before. It just wasn't quite working as efficiently as it should have been. We see that going forward working exactly as we expected. But the savings have already been baked in terms of the budget savings.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
For clarification, on the capital spend on the leisure projects, both for here and Berkhamsted, from what I recall, the intention was to mobilise them both so that they worked in basically tandem, a bit of an overlap between the two. Is that still the case? Because we're only referring to the Hemel one here.
That's probably just a miss in terms of wording. We mean the leisure programme as a whole because it is one programme of works. In terms of the details of that, we're expecting that over the next few months. I think there was a report in June and July that went to Scrutiny in terms of outlining the works that we want to do. The service now are working on how they can best deliver that and working with the provider in terms of everyone active on the best approach and what we can do to minimise disruption over that period as well. So in terms of that programme of works, I'm not entirely clear what it will be, but it will be as efficient as we can be in terms of the end user.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No? Okay. Thank you for the report. We will note that as read. And now we move on to agenda item 9, the budget setting process, which is a presentation. Just in case anybody did miss the follow-up email, there was no additional report sent. So we're all seeing this for the very first time. Nobody's had a sneak peek.
Right, so I will introduce some of this. Now, some of these slides are taken quite deliberately from some of the members' training in terms of budget setting process and timelines. The idea of this session is to have a kind of interactive session where members can make any questions or queries they have on the processes or the roles and responsibilities. One of the questions I get asked most by members, particularly back office members, is how do I have input into the budget setting process? How do I change budgets in areas? Hopefully, this presentation is going to give you an idea of what the role of officers, different groups of officers and members is, and the cycle, and the processes where you can get involved. Ask questions along the way. There will be some points where we'll probably say, wait, we'll come to that. But don't be afraid to ask questions, because what we want is this group to be walking away saying, I know what the budget setting process is, I know how I can get involved, how I can raise the issues that I want to raise. And it isn't necessarily with officers, it's normally with portfolio holders or with cabinet colleagues to then raise with officers and then go through that cycle again. But we'll go through some of the key kind of budget areas.
Question, are is the slide deck going to be put out after?
It will be circulated afterwards. The reason we didn't beforehand is for engagement. No, it's a very valid question. I was speaking with Councillor Allen and said, look, we deliberately haven't taken it out because we wanted to get 100% engagement. And also, you'll see, most of these slides are not very wordy. We will talk to them. So again, sending a slide deck out sometimes, you miss the point to a certain extent. So what we'll cover, general fund, HRA, capital budgets, and then the budget setting cycle, which, believe it or not, runs through the 12-month period and never stops running. It has different elements to it, be it the MTFS, service planning, the actual budget setting, but and then on to revenue monitoring that we're just talking about. It just keeps rolling. So from that perspective, there's not a set point in time. We do deal with issues throughout the year.
Yes, so our responsibility in terms of budgets. So taken from our 25-26 budgets, we have for general fund, £99 million worth of expenditure that we need to balance off. HRA has 72 million, and we have 236 million in a 5-year capital programme. So there's lots of cash balances, budgeting that we have to manage as an organisation. The that are key. So for the HRA, it has to self-fund. So whatever it spends, it must get its income in, whether it be through borrowing or through rents and other income. For the general fund, we obviously have other grants and other things, but it's mainly income from council tax and fees and charges is the big one for us for that.
So just a quick question. Does it surprise anybody in this committee that, you know, we're an organisation of 400 million a year?
Yeah.
And I'd be surprised, particularly for newer members, if that didn't surprise you. And I think people forget how big an organisation we are. You know, there are some large ones in there. There's 50 million that comes in and out for housing benefits to a certain extent. But it's classed as a medium-sized organisation in terms of turnover and staffing. So from that perspective, you know, that's why we're often looked at by residents as someone who's quite big and quite unwieldy. We are quite a big organisation in terms of what we do. So we're moving on to the actual cycle. As I said, it carries on going round. You've got the quarters here, but it's kind of irrelevant. Some of these things are movable. Apart from setting the budget, everything else is to a certain extent transferable. But where we start with looking at the previous year's outturn around April time, along with the service plans that are set up between January and May time. Those two things together, we look at what the service is trying to achieve over the next 12 to 36 months and how they've delivered within their budget in the last financial year. And between those two things and the horizon scanning that goes with service planning, it formulates what we think we need across all the service areas in Decorum. That gets grouped into a series of assumptions, be it growth, be it savings, be it funding, which we form as part of our medium-term financial strategy, which this year was delivered in July to Cabinet and sets out the core assumptions of our financial plan between a 3 and 5 year period. We're moving on in terms of the medium-term financial strategy, move on to building up the budget, which is the process we're in now. We take our MTFS assumptions and we try and build a 1 year budget for the next financial year. As an organisation, we do what's called incremental budgeting. So we take our base budget from the previous year, put any changes in that we want, and it delivers the next year's budget. So incremental basically builds incrementally on the previous year's budget. There's lots of other budget ways you can do it, like zero-based, starting from scratch, which I'm sure you can imagine as a £400 million a year organisation would take a huge amount of time. Which is why we go on incremental budgeting.
Does the incremental budgeting exclude or include the slippage? So are they taken as
So that is taken into consideration. Slippage on capital, surpluses or underspends or overspends on revenue side. All of that is in the melting pot. Then we put that together as a draft budget scrutiny, which comes at the end of the calendar year, normally around December time. And then we look at getting approval for the final budget along with statutory requirements in February. So you can see that whole cycle working through. Now, through that cycle, different individuals, different officers, different members get involved and have different responsibilities.
Officers, so we have different teams of officers. So we have like the budget holders, the heads of service, those that have got the overriding responsibility for their budget. So they kind of work with us, look at their service plans. What is their responsibility? Can they meet it? What are their concerns? Sort of to work through and build from there. They use that to help build their service plans moving forward and have to look at proposals and things in terms of what budget envelope they've got, requirements for growth, efficiencies that they could help deliver. We then have the strategic leadership team that scrutinise everything that the budget holders and finance and the other officers across the authority do. So any ideas, things that they look at and they give their viewpoint and they push back. They challenge us in finance, they challenge the budget holders on, well, is there another way of doing it? We can't afford to do that. What alternatives have we got? So we get that pushback from the teams, and then the finance are there to support the budget holders in calculating, delivering things. But also we push back, you know, they come to us with, I need another person, it's going to cost me 25 grand. But actually, no, that person's going to cost you £40,000. So we sort of there and we challenge them and look at the assumptions they're making and are they realistic before that gets put forward to the senior leadership team portfolio holders from there.
So the key there for me, in terms of, this is officer responsibilities. One of the key officer responsibilities for SLT is to ensure they've got that ongoing engagement with portfolio holders, their specific portfolio holder and the wider cabinet. So the decisions we're looking to make in budgetary terms have their input and their direction, and they decide where decisions will be go, if they go to group, go to scrutiny, if they require further intake, whether it's something that doesn't meet with the corporate plan. So there's a real link there between senior officers and cabinet in terms of that process.
So for officers, the first stage of it is that service planning, which Nigel mentioned earlier. So sort of we look at what the service core delivery is, what is the requirement for that service. We also look at the corporate plan. How does that service fit into the corporate plan? Is there anything that they do or don't do that either does or doesn't fit into the corporate plan, and how then should we utilise that within the budget? It's very much service-led. So there is feed-in from finance and other support services, but it's service-led, it's their service, they need to deliver it, they need to meet what they're promising. The process, they say we have to look at what budget they've got, is it sufficient, do they need more? Can we afford to do more? They might have an idea in their head to improve something, but actually, is that affordable? What does that bring value for money? So there's all that built into their service plan. And then we look at horizon scanning. Is there any change in legislation, any change in sort of requirements, requests from members, things like that, do we have the opportunity to build that into the service plan and use that to start developing and building budgets moving forward?
That building block works on to the MTFS. I won't go through a huge amount of detail here because we did sign off the MTFS in July, but as I said at the time, it is a compilation of assumptions and estimates with lots of evidence base internally through service planning, externally through advisors and independent advice and guidance to develop something that hopefully is sustainable over a 3 to 5 year period. Officers' role here is to make sure that we are the experts in our service area, we're the experts in terms of informing members of what we think will happen and why, and we'll come to members' view in terms of what members' role is there. But from officers' perspective, we need to fulfil that. We need to be putting things in front of members that, through check and challenge, they believe is robust, sufficient and sustainable. Key assumptions, again, we're not going to go through this at all, but it's all the things we've listed before and the things that you see in the MTFS last month.
The next step in terms of building that budget is the scrutiny part, which we kind of mentioned before in terms of service planning and other things. So they develop their ideas, we develop the budget, we put ideas forward. So then ideas go to different sort of areas. So we go to the strategic directions, SLT, look at growth, efficiencies. Again, they challenge it, they question it, they push back. It also goes to scrutiny for the challenge as well, and portfolio holders. We take it to the budget review group, which includes members and officers. And so the whole point of that is it's challenged the whole time, we push back. So it's not just a 1, 2, 3 step, it's a 1, 2, 3, back to 1. It's a continued routine that goes round and round until we're kind of in agreement that that is the best possible budget we can set that benefits the organisation and the residents.
So in terms of budget review group, people around these tables know who's in budget review group? I'd be amazed if you did, partly because it's slightly changed here or there. So the budget review group is the leader, deputy leader, portfolio holder for commercial and corporate finance. The chief exec, the 151 and relevant SLT colleagues, depending on what's been discussed. And again, as I was saying earlier about that cycle throughout the year, that happens every month now. So it is an ongoing, and they are constantly involved in terms of discussions and direction. Lots of the work is done outside of it, but what that does is look at a very high level picture in terms of what we're going to look at, how we're going to develop that and what the plans are in terms of going forward. So that's a key aspect for members in terms of being able to feed into the budget process. Which moves us nicely on to members' responsibility. So we've talked a lot about in terms of what officers do. Full-time staff, there's a lot of us. From that perspective, we are here to develop the statutory detailed budgets that you need to see as members and BRG need to see in terms of what they review and what they assess. That's our role. What's members' role in this? So members' role are there to scrutinise throughout. That's what this scrutiny group is for. That is what audit committee is for to a certain extent. That's the reason why we bring financial performance reports here. It's the reason why we bring treasury reports to audit committee, is to allow members to scrutinise where we're spending, what we're spending, and whether that is something that they feel we should be spending, and asking the right questions. Now, this is where it can get very difficult for members, because you generally have an administration that sets a corporate plan, sets the objectives, and hopefully the decisions that are made in terms of budget setting are aligned and in tune with that corporate plan. So it means that sometimes opposition members will be feeling, how can I get involved in the budget setting? And you've got less of a say. Now, politically, we're in a slightly different place in terms of our political makeup. So from that perspective, to a certain extent, more and more people or members are involved in terms of that budget setting process. But the process doesn't change. The engagement doesn't. Scrutiny groups are times where major decisions will come. So in November, we have a key decision that wants to go to Cabinet in December. So in November, we will bring it here. So scrutiny have a chance to challenge, feedback, and get involved in that. Equally, in terms of this process, we have slightly extended this process this year. So some of you may be aware, we now have a leaders group. And if there are significant issues that the leader of the council, Sally, wants to discuss with the wider group leadership, we will discuss that at the leaders group as well. So again, there is more engagement with different political parties than there has been previously, more consultation. So hopefully that means people are more aware of what's going on with the budget setting process than they have previously. So I've shown this slide before. I'm sure most of you have probably seen it. Maybe not Andrew, because he's forgotten his glasses again.
No, I can see it.
This is the role, you know. I've gone on about your role is to scrutinise and to challenge and to check. Just be inquisitive. Hopefully, you should all feel that you can ask any question from that perspective, because questions lead to more challenge, more questions, and often better ideas, better solutions. That's why we bring things to scrutiny. That's why the current administration consults stakeholders so much, because they want to make sure that everybody's engaged and everybody's involved in those processes.
I'm going to ask a question now.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you have, and if it was in a training, I apologise, has anyone tried to do a crib sheet of all the technical words you use and what they mean? You know, slippage, you know, utilities.
Yeah.
Is there a guide?
There isn't a specific guide. It should be, officer reports shouldn't involve any abbreviations without them being explained. So the glossary part of if you look at cabinet reports and scrutiny reports, there's a glossary that says at the beginning that should have any key words or phrases that you need to be aware of. And officers, experienced officers, I'll let you all shoot me down now, shouldn't be putting things in a report for members that members, stroke the layperson, if it's for the public consumption, can't read and understand. There might be elements that maybe fly above them, but there shouldn't be anything in there that they lose because of the use of language or abbreviations.
Thank you.
Again, this is just a bit of a headline to the basis of scrutiny. There are some very simple questions, you know, is there another way of doing it? You know, how did you come to that conclusion? What have you looked at so far? How do other people do it? Very basic questions which we get and we acknowledge, and hopefully we answer with, well, this is what we did, or this is what somebody else does, and you get the answers if you've not got them in the report that you want to see. Key dates and timeline for the 26-27 budget setting. So we are busy now turning the MTFS and what government information we have in terms of the fair funding review, of trying to put some papers together for December in terms of scrutiny. That will include things like fees and charges, which are going to come back to the scrutiny. They're on the forward agenda for November. Again, something that we brought forward so that we can get more consultation, more engagement prior to implementation. So hopefully that's something that members can get involved in as well. The key issue that we always have in budget setting, and I said to this group, is we were going to find out our finance settlement in November this year for the first time in my finance career, until the budget was announced last week to be held at the end of November, and now government have said that we can expect our settlement on the 17th of December, the day before civil service go for Christmas recess. So we are back to receiving that very late. Now, given some of you will be aware, the Fair Funding Review has thrown everything up in the air. There's more uncertainty than there has been previously. The benefit is, the light at the end of the tunnel is we're going to get a 3-year settlement. Whether it's good, bad, indifferent, we're going to know what the next 3 years look like, which will be good for financial planning. And because we're in a position where our budget looks fairly balanced for next year, it shouldn't cause us a huge amount of noise. So the idea at the moment is we will bring our scrutiny budget papers in December as usual, and we'll do an update for this committee in February following the finance settlement and any changes that come out of that. Any questions?
Just a quick one. Is the fair funding review and the finance settlement one and the same thing, or is the fair funding review likely to come out separate?
So the fair funding review, in terms of some of its headline policies and strategies, is likely to come out in November in a policy paper, but it won't have numbers. It will just be a policy paper that will probably give a highlight, and it will probably avoid certain things like business rates, because that will come out in the budget a week or so later. So that is slightly different in terms of the fair funding review strategy. The finance settlement is the outcome of the fair funding review. That is when we will get our 3-year settlement, be it fair funding settlement, government cycle, whatever you want to call it. It's effectively the same thing, but they will try and slightly have a divide between the two, because fair funding review will also encompass wider than just local authorities.
No, I'll wait, sorry, I'll come in at the end if there's other questions.
Councillor Adeleke.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The review group during your sounds as if it's key part of the whole process. Do you at any given time have to seek external advice or specialist advice?
So in terms of the budget review group, it is very high level. So that will look at a list of projects or reviews that are being taken at that time. The reports that go there will involve independent advice or guidance as and when required. So as officers, we always take independent advice if we feel we need it. We have some in-house expertise, but we don't have it all. A fine way of looking at that is when it comes to our financial valuations, we have independent valuers that value our assets because we don't have the expertise in-house. But when it comes to commercial rents, we set our own commercial rents because we have that expertise. It is a little bit of a mixed bag, and every local authority is different. Some local authorities will have different areas of expertise. Some will rely on independent advisors.
I want to mention that that's also one of the advantages of setting an incremental budget, is that the key driver is what you already know.
Yeah.
Councillor Gale.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about this incremental budget setting. It seems a very time-efficient way of setting a budget. But what are the disadvantages of incremental budget? I mean, one of the things that springs to mind is the lack of capacity to innovate and maybe introduce a new service or introduce something that we haven't thought of before.
So in terms of the major disadvantage of incremental budgeting is if your baseline budget is inaccurate, you just exemplify it year on year. And you end up with budgets that don't relate to the service area that they're delivering. Now, most of our budgets are well within a 5% tolerance up or down. Even when you look at the waste service with a significant overspend at the moment, given the size of that service, it's still something like 6 or 7% of its overall budget. So it's not a million miles off. But if you had much bigger variances, and I've worked in authorities that did have much bigger variances, you just make it bigger year on year. And then it makes budget monitoring and service financial cost monitoring very difficult to do. But it is very efficient. And in terms of new services, incremental budget does not stop you bringing new services in. Because you take your core budget and your services, you inflate them for the next year. But if there's a government policy saying you need to do X or Y, you add growth into that budget. And you'd bring a new service and you'd add growth to it. You obviously need to find a way of financing that, which is where it becomes slightly more difficult. But you can obviously add services or take services away from incremental. All you're doing is you're taking a baseline and saying, what do we add? What do we take away? That's your new budget.
What do you mean by growth? What do you mean by...
So we've got a base budget now that's balanced, say for 24-25. So we need to get, for 25-26, sorry, we need to get to a 26-7 balanced budget. So if we put in loads of new services and growth and no way of financing it, we're not going to balance the budget. So if we add £1 million to environmental services, we need to find £1 million somewhere, or £1 million of additional income. So that's where your incremental, all your positives need to be outweighed by your negatives. And sometimes your negatives are reductions in government funding, which means you have to make changes to your services to be able to balance your books.
So it sounds like it's very difficult to add new services then.
It's difficult because you've got a set fiscal envelope.
Councillor Greenfield.
A personal interest question, first of all. Obviously, I was elected at a by-election, so I didn't do any new member budget training. Is that available online? Are there slides?
We held three sessions, I think, in the end of that. We will be holding some more sessions this year. You have gone through about 50% of it in those slides there. There are some other areas in much more detail, particularly for newer councillors. But I am quite happy. We've had a couple of by-elections recently. So that makes me think I will reach out to the new councillors to see if they want a small session to go through that, because I think it'd be very useful.
It would be very helpful. It's very different to the way we used to do it, but then we were always tasked with savings. And my second question was going to be, obviously, we've got local government reorganisation coming. How are we managing that from a budget perspective, or will some of that impact be funded elsewhere?
So Claire just looked at me because I'm living.
Sorry, shouldn't have asked that question.
I'm living LGR. LGR at the moment isn't actually causing us any significant budget impacts. The programme of works up to November predominantly is funded through a government grant to fund that. What I would say is that money is now committed or spent. There is likely to be a small cost to the council up to that point in time of probably around £25,000 at the moment. That's not just us, that will be every district across Hertfordshire to deliver that programme of works. We did set aside at the end of 24-25 an additional 500,000 into a specific reserve for local government reorganisation, because we felt that is going to cost a significant amount of money over the next 2 years. And the fact that I'm already sitting here 3 months after setting that up saying we're probably going to draw down 25,000, and we're not even halfway through this year really in terms of full commitments, I suspect over the next 2 years that reserve will get quite significant drawdowns unless government provides additional funding, which they may do, but they're very quiet on it.
Councillor Juris.
Yeah, in a way, picking up your very last point there, in the sort of early evaluation of the budget and potential proposals coming in and so on, whether it be from the cabinet members or via the cabinet members from if you like, backbench members, do you engage in a sort of a what-if scenario, given that we live in a somewhat volatile situation?
So, as part of the budget report, which I'm sure you've read many times, Councillor Dose,
I asked the question for the benefit of those others.
I'm glad, I appreciate that. There is a large section there around risks and opportunities, and that is where we do sensitivity analysis on some of our service areas and on government policy and the current trend at the moment. And we highlight our major risks and our major opportunities in terms of the baseline budget. So last year, in terms of major risks, temporary accommodation, homelessness were in there. So environmental services was there as well. So from that perspective, tick in terms of we highlighted it as a risk. We didn't probably quite set the budget quite at the right level, but we'll mitigate that in year. So we do absolutely look at different scenarios. The only way I can sign the budget off, and there is a section in the budget where I literally, section 151, have to say this budget is robust, is sustainable, and we have relevant reserves, is by doing that sensitivity testing, because I need to be comfortable, if I want a career, that when we're setting the budget, we have the right level set, the right evidence base, and also the right reserves if things do go wrong and what those areas are. In terms of year end, if at year end the budget hasn't been delivered and there are large areas that haven't come up in that budget report, then I would fully expect members to be saying, you didn't raise this as a risk or an opportunity, why is it now coming up? And it may be that there's external circumstances, it may be that it was overlooked and it shouldn't have been.
Well, I guess to some extent that's where the audit committee comes in.
It is absolutely where the audit committee come in. So some of one of the things that the audit committee do is look at strategic risks at a very high level, and that one of those is around financial resilience, and that's absolutely something we need to look at.
Thank you. Councillor Symington.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in at the end and say that obviously, and I think it's already been mentioned, but any ideas on specific areas, we should go to the portfolio holders and kind of really welcome hearing what those might be. And also to mention that there are some quite considerable amounts of community infrastructure levy funds attached to each ward in the unparished areas, much of which has been unspent and is at the discretion of those ward councillors. So I would really urge you all to look at those areas and come forward with suggestions and work with officers and the administration as to how those might be spent for the benefit of residents. And if those funds aren't spent, they will be returned to developers in the longer term. So it's really, really important for all our residents that we do look at spending those monies. And in the parished areas, those funds go via the town and parish councils. So, to work with the town and parish councils on the same basis if you're a councillor in a town or parish council area.
I fear I'm setting myself up for a fall here, but I recall some years ago getting lists of, possibly in one of the Finance and Resources meetings, I don't know, of the funds attributed to each parish council. I don't remember seeing those figures very recently in the last year, 18 months, 2 years.
They are, sorry Chair, they are provided annually to the SPAY committee.
That, if I may, that only represents a small number of members. So could I ask perhaps that be distributed to all members?
Absolutely.
Please.
It's a really important area, and it's something that I'm really keen to I'm really keen to highlight, and I'm highlighting it here, and I will highlight it to everybody else. And you're right, Terry, Councillor Duras, that the best way to do that is to send out the information. And I have certainly, I have seen something recently because I've asked for it, and I think you're right that.
It is published. There's an annual report in terms
but
of.
I think it might be worth, if you're happy.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely.
An interim figure, and that we. We are effectively time limited as a council, and I think everybody appreciates actually the priority is to spend these funds for the benefit of our residents. And the sooner we get on and get those put into work programmes, frankly, the better.
And I may be wrong, but I would imagine that a good number of members would be surprised at the amount of SIL funding that there is actually in the pot.
I can't say whether they'd be surprised, but there are some very large amounts in some areas where they're building.
Thanks. I think we're all agreed that that should be circulated. I don't know how important it is, but I suspect that has to be circulated under the guise of SPAY, because I think SPAY owns those numbers. But I have no objection.
There is no issue with circulating information. It's got one scrutiny, two other scrutiny members. It's just we wouldn't want to discuss it in this forum because it'll be discussed in another forum, and before you know it, you're having the same discussion.
Councillor Stevens.
Sorry, just before we move on, can we agree that, Nigel, that we can just...
Yeah, no, I think Julie's action that.
Yes, I have.
No, I just wanted to point out that effectively we, the parish council, see the funds on a 6-monthly basis. So at the end of the year, as well as in October.
And that's because biannually we have to report the actuals and the projections mid-year, which is why I know the data is there and available, and we're actually at about the period where it gets circulated, so I'll tap into the team in terms of when that is, but we could probably get that around quite timely. I'll just have to check with them, because it might be the end of September.
Well, that's 6
So,
months,
yeah, so it's probably,
6 months.
it might be the 6 monthly one that we'll look to circulate, because there is a reasonable amount of work done on commitments and actuals, and there'll be no point circulating now and then it change significantly over the next month.
We don't have a big queue of people going, asking for questions, but I just want to point out we're straying a little bit off topic. So I'm quite happy, because I don't think that we're missing out on talking things, but we've obviously gone from budget setting now to spending spending reserves, which is obviously very important. So I'll continue to indulge that, but I am just acknowledging that we've gone off topic. Councillor Greenfield.
This, bearing in mind, a conversation might not be the right forum for this. If a resident wants to ask how a SIL has been spent in a ward and the agreement between a parish and the developer and Decorum, how would they find out?
Very good question, that. I'm not entirely sure what the process is and if there's a SIL mailbox or not, but we can take that away and find out how residents can find out how funds are spent. I've come across queries and I've responded to queries before, but I'm not 100% sure what the process is.
In terms of the parished areas, each parish council is required annually to produce a SIL report on the income and outcome on SIL projects. So with the parished areas, that information should be made available on parish council websites. With the non-parished ones, I think we're in a difficult area. I don't think we've ever publicised that.
No. I will find out what the process is. There's always a process to access information. I just don't necessarily know what that one is exactly.
Thank you.
So I know you're allowing us, thank you, Chair, to range around this subject, but I think there is not just an issue of access to the information, it's actually an issue of access of accountability in the town and parish councils. Obviously, the accountability is very clear in the case of the ward councillors. That level of accountability doesn't seem clear to me, and that's something I think we should take out of meeting, but I'm just recognising it here whilst we're having that discussion.
Well, one point, and then there may be some more questions coming, but just one more point to raise, LGR was mentioned. With the present government timetable, we are likely to only have 2 more budgets where we have 100% control of our spend. Because at present, what the government proposes is once they have formally decided, the Secretary of State, in terms of what the future entities will look like, there will be certain limitations put on districts on what they can spend and how they can seek approval for that spend. So you are looking at setting a budget for 26-27 and hopefully 27-28, where you've got the freedoms, or 100% freedoms, to make commitments in terms of budget spend within sustainable and deliverable levels. And again, my role does not change. If something isn't sustainable or deliverable, I see Decorum and the new entity as an ongoing concern. But that is worth noting.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? No? Okay. I believe that is our last agenda item, so I will just confirm and yep. So we will close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you again to officers for the presentation.
Thank you.